it's the one thing that he took with him, if you like, from along with Invictus. A lot of those patronages he had to give up that were associated with the crown. This was something that was his. It was completely his.
So, Kate.
Roya.
2025 has not been the quiet year that Prince Harry perhaps was hoping for. Because last week he made the papers as his US visa documents were released in a row about previous drug use. And this week, Kate, you reported another story that kept him all across the front pages. And this one, we think, is going to hurt him a lot. So, it's a great story. For anyone who might have missed it, tell us what has happened to Sentebale, that charity that's so close to his heart.
Yeah, so Prince Harry and his co-founder, Prince Seeiso from Lesotho, released a joint statement in which they said they were resigning from the charity they co-founded nearly 20 years ago. This was Sentebale. It means forget-me-not in Sesotho. And that was Princess Diana's favourite flower. And that's why it was named that way. It was in honour of his mother, Diana, but also Prince Seeiso, who'd also lost his mother. And together, the princes set up this brilliant charity, which was designed to help orphans who are suffering in the country. So eradicate poverty, raise awareness of HIV and AIDS, and try to stop the blight there.
Real passion project for Harry, wasn't it?
It was a real passion project. So millions and millions of pounds were raised, largely through this annual polo event.
Yeah.
And yet there was this huge bust-up with the chair of the board. And it got to a point where Harry and Seeiso and the trustees wanted to get rid of the chair of the board, a woman called Dr. Sophie Chanduka.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I'm not going anywhere, and took out a lawsuit, essentially, to stop them from getting rid of her.
Wow.
So they were left with no other recourse apart from to resign. And this was extraordinary. So the state...
It has been a real war of words, hasn't it, Kate? Remind us what's been said on both sides.
Absolutely. So in Harry and Seiso's statement, which I got hold of before it had been publicly released, and had to go to them and say, look, we understand you're about to release this. Can you can just confirm it? They said, look, nearly 20 years ago, we founded Sentebale in honour of our mothers. It means forget-me-not, from the local language of Lesotho. And it's what we always promised the young people we'd serve through this charity. Today is no different. With heavy hearts, we've resigned from our roles as patrons of the organisation until further notice, in support of and solidarity with the Board of Trustees, who have had to do the same. It is devastating that the relationship between the charity's trustees and the chair of the board broke down beyond repair, creating an untenable situation. They're saying the Trustees Act, that goes on and say that the trustees acted in the best interests. And I've also got a statement from several of the former trustees, who include Mark Dyer, known as Marco.
So close to Harry.
Absolutely.
And William, godfather to Prince Archie.
Yeah, and former equerry to the King in the 1990s when he was Prince of Wales. And they say, as a group of British and African trustees, we have made the difficult decision to unanimously resign as board members of Sentebale. They go on to say that their priority has always been to help the charity, and they say it's desperately sad that this relationship has broken down. It's escalated to a lawsuit by the chair against the charity to block us from voting her out after our request for her resignation was rejected. But they say that in good conscience, they couldn't allow Sentebale to undertake legal and financial burden, so they've been left with no other option apart from to leave. Now, after we published our story and we'd obviously gone to the chair of the board for comment. Yeah. She then came back and said...
With a missile.
Yeah, an absolute missile. It's called attack is the best form of defence, saying, what about, harassment, bullying...
Misogyny and
misogynoir, so a kind of a racist element to it as well, saying against black women in particular. And this is toxic. This is a huge war of words.
Yeah.
For her to come back with something so strong.
The charity also, Sentebale's statement was pretty punchy too. It was quite, her statement was, like a bomb. Mm-hmm. Again, it was pretty clear that she was, pointing the finger at all of them, but also pointing the finger at Harry when she said there are people who play the victim and use the press that they disdain to put things out there. It was so pointed.
Well, so obviously pointing at Harry, wasn't it?
I thought the charity's response was interesting because the charity put out a statement effectively backing their chair that said, founders and patrons are all very, well and good, and we thank them for it. But the real people that do the work are the people on the ground. It basically said, thank you so much, but bye-bye, Prince Harry and Princess Seeiso.
And that's coming from the chair, because the charity now is the chair.
Yeah.
And she's called it restructuring. She's brought in new trustees to replace the ones that have walked out. So I think essentially her running the show, but without Harry, what is it? And I spoke to a man they call Dr. Kelly. He's one of the former trustees, and I wrote a sort of follow-up piece with him. He's saying Seeiso and Harry are completely torn apart by this, and the idea that they would abandon the kids, which is not true at all. It's just they were left with no other option to do it. But I mean, they're all kind of baffled and bewildered that they could wind up in this situation. Now, it transpires that this has all been brewing for a long time, of course. She was hired in July 2023.
He hadn't been to Lesotho for a long time as well.
No.
He went last year with Seeiso, didn't he? And there had been a gap. He hadn't been since 2018, maybe. It was quite a long time. And I mean, I remember,
went last year, didn't he?
He went last year. But everyone, in sort of following up your story, everyone has sort of noted that there'd been a real gap between him going last year and previously going. When you think about, he went a few times during the sort of 2000s. I remember going out with him. I think it was 2015 to open a new children's centre. I mean, he absolutely adored that charity. And
a lot of it was based here until sort of last year, and they decided to move it to Africa, which seemed like a good idea. It's an African charity. Let's have it for Africa, employ more African people as part of it, and that all seemed sort of sensible. Until, things started to unravel. So one of the major sponsors for the annual polo event decided they weren't going to be involved anymore. There seems to have been some disagreement with the chair of the boards. So when the polo event went ahead last year, it was the Miami Cup. It wasn't the Sentebale Cup, which actually could have been, the sort of writing on the wall at the time. There is supposed to be a polo match in November this year. That's not going to go ahead. There's no way Nacho Figueres is going to join Harry. He's the Argentinian polo player who's best mates with Harry. He stars in a lot of his programs.
But what is that charity without Harry?
This is what Dr. Kelly was saying to me. What is it there is no entity without Harry and Seeiso.
No.
Poor Seeiso at the moment is really gutted. I mean, Dr. Kelly's saying he worries for their the princes, both of them, emotional well-being. Seiso's gutted. He's recently had a family bereavement separately. And I think from the tone of the statement, there is hope that perhaps if the chair of the boards could shuffle off, they could regain control, hopefully get those sponsors back on board and get it back on track. But who knows,
how much damage has been done.
Yeah, and if they've lost money coming in. Harry gave $1.5 million of his proceeds from his spare autobiography, which you'll remember, to the charity. This has been a kind of lifelong kind of passion project from being his late teens.
To give people an idea of how important it was to him, not only the amount of times he'd visited when he was younger and how young he was when he started at 19, but the very last engagement he did here before he left these shores to pursue his life in California was at a dinner for Sentebale, and he gave that very moving speech saying, I'd wanted to carry on sort of in service of the crown and in service of my country and all of you, and but Sentebale will be, is so important, and I'll be involved forever. And he talked about the Sentebale family that had watched him grow up and put their arms around him.
They are family. Like Seeiso sees him as family, and Seeiso is the brother of the King of Lesotho, and the King of Lesotho calls Harry brother as well. They're all so close.
How damaging do you think it is for Harry in terms of, there's so many question marks over Harry's purpose and his raison d'etre and what he wants to do and how he wants to forge ahead with his future, which I think to a lot of us still isn't particularly clear. Sentebale was always something that, even though he might not have done loads and loads of engagements for, he was very sort of set on, as you say, raising money for, was a real connection with his life before, from his sort of younger days, a real connection with his mother. How much of a loss is it, and how damaging is it for this to have happened over something that's so personal to him? And if he can't sort of, get back in there and regain control of it, how much of a void does that leave him?
I think it's huge. I think like you say, the connection with his mother and all that sort of thing, but it's a connection with who Harry is and what he stands for, isn't it? I mean, it's that and Invictus. And you just think for both of them, they're almost impeachable. You say that they're brilliant projects that he's worked on, his brainchild in both instances. And I think this
one of his big connections with Africa, which he's always said is his home from home.
Yeah, and he's loved it. And I think I can just imagine that he's completely gutted by it. Because it's so much a pillar of what he is, what he does, and what he stands for. And like you rightly say, it's the one thing that he took with him, if you like, from along with Invictus. A lot of those patronages he had to give up that were associated with the Crown. This was something that was his. It was completely his. We saw the pictures of him visiting last year, and him and Seeiso are close. And I think it just strikes to the fact of how serious this is, that the fact that they all walked off. They've all walked off the job. And now you've got this increasingly bitter and toxic war of words. And, the PR ramifications of that. Already you can see people who don't like Harry online going, oh, well, obviously the charity was going wrong, so they've blamed it on this woman. I mean, it's more complex than that. Yeah. But that he will not like how that's playing out PR-wise. Yeah. And you can understand why, but I think there's sort of safety in numbers there. You look at Mark Dyer, you look at some really serious trustees who've left. Linda Chalker, Baroness Chalker left in November.
It's been a trickle, hasn't it, of departures?
Yes, it has. I think as people have realised, this is something that's probably there's no way back from this. And, there's lots of arguments about should they be raising money for African charities through one very white, very privileged polo match a year. Well, that's the kind of fundraising model. And people will pay £100,000 to play polo with Prince Harry. And if that money's going to go to a good cause, then it's stood the test of time, nearly 20 years. They've raised an awful lot of money. They've created a centre out in Lesotho. It's all the good work that they've done out there. It just seems, a real shame, I think, and something with which I have sympathy for Harry on this one. Yeah. I don't always have sympathy with Harry, I think, for various things, but on this one, I do. I think it's really unfortunate. And someone said to me this morning, actually, the real people who are suffering, not the Harry, it's the children. Yeah, it's the people who get helped by the charity.
And where does that leave them?
Exactly. Yeah. So
very sad. Watch this space. More to come. It's a great story.
Thank you.